Coming up today on Locked On at Texas Tech, dollars, cents, and change in the wind. We explore the future next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, always free and available on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. And today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. With the only Chris Level, I'm Casey Cowan. Thanks as always for making us your first listen. And Chris, we're getting into today some big news well beyond just the confines of Texas Tech, but will impact college sports far and wide. Of course, the Red Raiders a part of that category. So we'll get into some of the news that is happening this week and maybe what the conversation could look like by the end of the week. And our conversation here today spurred on by this reporting from Pete Thamel, who tweeted this, and I'll put it on the screen for those watching on YouTube, give it a rundown for those listening via podcast. But this was the info just within the last 24 hours. Thamel saying college sports leaders are targeting the end of the week to finalize the terms of the long-form agreement of the House settlement. According to his sources, the expected target remains a roster limit of 105 for football and 34 for baseball. So we'll get into the impacts of the roster. Want to also get into an adjacent sort of conversation with you today regarding max revenue sharing. Of course, Texas Tech has already indicated that they will also be in that category. So a whole lot to process here, but it does actually seem like maybe there's some resolution within sight. But man, the consequences that will come about as a result of the resolution leave a whole lot of things to digest, right?
Yeah, because we weren't sure. I mean, there was rumors that obviously this was going to land at 85, and the elimination of the walk-on, and we weren't sure kind of where this was going to fall. And coaches across the country were pushing for more, and I think the argument was, hey, the NCAA folks are saying NFL gets away with 53 guys, and then only 45 are active on a Sunday, and college coaches are saying yes. However, if the kicker breaks his foot in a week, they hit the streets and they have free agent tryouts and they go sign somebody. That portion of ability to add to their roster is unlimited. Plus, you had a practice squad and all these different things. And I think that I guess that 105, because it says his reporting says expected. Okay, so it's not guaranteed, but I think that's key. But if it does land at 105, probably a bit better than what I thought, and probably a win for coaches. However, as you mentioned, there's some, I don't know if the right term is collateral damage, but there's significance in what that means. As I understand it, that means all 105 can now be placed on scholarship. And it also eliminates your ability to only bring in 25 per year and the like. So you could theoretically bring in, a whole new team, I don't know if Deion Sanders or Colorado would even push the envelope there, but you could theoretically do this. It also means that the revenue sharing component, whatever they were going to limit your roster size to, that's now how many people you will have to pay if you're paying football. Whereas there's been different categories with, okay, we have a scholarship player, then you have a preferred walk-on, then you have a regular walk-on, and hey, we can't put you on scholarship now, but we'll do the whole NIL thing, and you'll get put on scholarship later date. And I mean, there's all these different. I think now everybody would, once this passes and is effective, everybody's at this point the same, in theory. It leads to, but so now you're going to have to take whatever piece of pie, and that's a whole separate conversation of the revenue sharing money that you're going to get, that you're going to allocate to football. And that's a whole loaded conversation, as each institution will have to decide how they want to allocate men to women's sports, football to basketball to whatever else, and all that. And then at that point, you'll have to say, okay, I've got 105 guys to pay, because that's on average. I mean, I think the SEC, the talk out of their media days last week, a lot of coaches were saying, yeah, it's my understanding that our institution's talking a lot about, there was a lot of the same verbiage last week at SEC media days in Dallas, and they were talking about $15 million per football team. Like, in other words, if you have $22 million that you're going to share with the athletic department, where SEC schools are talking like, okay, we're going to allocate $15 million of that to strictly football. That's about $140K a player if all were paid equally, and they won't be. You're going to have to decide, and that's what we're talking about with the whole James Blanchard thing and like capologists and all that. Okay, once we decide the dollar figure, we have to now determine what each position is worth and how we will allocate funds accordingly. Is it seniority? Is it how many stars you had when you were recruited? Is it how many players of the week in the Big 12 awards that you win? I mean, how do you determine, who gets what? And I've often thought, once you make these decisions, like, think about this. How many times do we see, not just at Tech, but just around the country, when you have a quarterback race, you pick one, you get into the season, and then somebody else kind of emerges, and then are you allowed to switch this and pivot? Like, hey man, the first 3 weeks in September, you were QB1 pay. Now we're bumping you to QB2 pay, and the other guy's going to, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of strange that and Joey, so we're clear here, Joey has worked a lot behind the scenes on this aspect of what a cap or how we would allocate is supposed to look like. I think he's pretty far down the road. Not that it's what they've come up with would be perfect or that they finalized anything, but I think they're well down the road on kind of what that would potentially look like. But pretty fascinating, and there's a lot of gray area to operate in. The other elephant in the room.
First, today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Never sweat buying tickets to your favorite events again with Gametime. It's always a breeze using the Gametime app, where you're going to find the best last-minute deals. And I love being able to scout out a view from any seat before pulling the trigger. And of course, it's always at the lowest price, guaranteed. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it begins, which means you can finish off that last beer at the tailgate at your own pace, because Gametime is the place to find last-minute seats to any event. They give you the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets, but not just fast and easy, also secure and simple to use. So right now, download the Gametime app and create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today for last-minute tickets at the lowest price, guaranteed.
The other elephant in the room, is my understanding, if you limit rosters to 105 players, and they're talking about baseball, which is what Pete Thamel, 11.7, now you would be able to have 34 on a team, and I think give scholarships to 34 players. So this all sounds wonderful, and the numbers are bigger and all that. Every scholarship you give over 85 in football or 11.7 in baseball, you must come up with that same scholarship for women with Title IX. It must be equal. That's the way it's written and all that, and everybody's abided by it. And so if you do theoretically give 105, which would be 20 plus, I mean, do you have to, not that you would go looking for women's sports to go give those to, but would you cut a men's team? Would you remove a men's program from your, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of dynamics at play here. And I don't know if we have it all quite figured out, but we're getting closer, it certainly appears.
Yeah, and you would have to think, cutting costs would be a more appealing move as opposed to adding something from a women's perspective. I don't know. We may be totally wrong on that, but just kind of based on the way that things can typically work, feeling like that might be the initial move. I'm curious, Chris, from a fan's perspective, just from your own personal perspective, good or bad thing here to see it not trimmed down so far? We've been talking about some of the pros and cons and that number 85, and man, what could that really look like? Do you even think it's noticeable to a fan, and specifically one that's a fan of Texas Tech? Because obviously I think different programs make different use of their rosters, and that includes some of the back end and some of the walk-ons and things like that. So how would you process it if it does come to be something around that area, 105 or so, as compared to what we have considered, I guess, in some weeks prior? I'm wondering if there's a bit of a bullet dodged, I guess, again, being a Texas Tech fan, as compared to the big trim if you went down closer to 85 or so. But how do you feel about it?
I think there's maybe minor noticeability. Is that a word?
Yes.
I think most coaches were hoping for 110, maybe even a little bit more. That extra quarterback, that extra guy we can just bring on, and just it gives you a little less margin for error when you're filling these roster spots. I'm also curious how you are tasked with whittling it down. I mean, after this season or before next season, do you have to tell 15 to 20 of them, hey man, you didn't make it? It's, appreciate it. We'll keep your number handy in case. There's that dynamic too. But I think that 105 is manageable. It's costly because that's how many guys you have to theoretically pay if you're gonna pay your football team. I guess you don't have to. You could say, hey, we're only going to pay the 70. I think that would hurt you in recruiting and all those kinds of things. I think surely if you're on a 105 man roster, in most cases you're going to get something from the revenue sharing. But it's all. I saw the quote from one of the conference commissioners the other day saying that there's stages to this, and it'll be interesting to see kind of what's being talked about, what becomes reality. But, for years, the Texas Tech has needed 4 to 5 QBs just to get through practices because the way they throw the football and all those things. And we see like NFL teams on a game day, they have a starter and a backup, and that's it. And you don't have anybody else active. And I'll tell you what else it I think enhances or creates is more versatility for guys, or having coaches coach more, versatility with their guys. So it gives you more options. Oh, he can do this, this, and this. Okay. That's, there's going to be some of that as well, but the whole thing's fascinating. And this is a major change. I guess you say football wins here. I just don't necessarily know if I understand who loses, because somebody will. Something or somebody will. And I'm not sure if we're far enough along to kind of get the feel for that yet. But this is very real, and this is going to happen. I mean, there's going to be a roster limit on something like this, and so I'm just not sure what that looks like yet.
Well, and of course, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. If you see things trimmed as far as, sports you're fielding a team for, then you'd feel like obviously there are some losers in that mix. But I know that no one wants to do that type of thing. But I'll be curious when the rubber meets the road as to who maybe has to do that kind of thing. And as we're talking about trimming, we're talking about revenue, we're talking about winners and losers. I'm curious about, the future of this revenue sharing conversation as well, because I know that Texas Tech has indicated they're going to be in a max revenue sharing category. There have been some others that have also, but am I naive to believe that everybody, say, in a Power 4 setting is going to be able to do this? Because as I sit here and look at it, I'm not even sure that everybody, say in the Big 12 is going to be able to do this, but some out there might assume, well, major college football programs, you're going to be able to be on this list. I don't know if it's going to be so easy, though.
I think your Big Tens and your SECs will absolutely fully, and I think most of the Big 12 would, where you're going to get into some issues is past that, the groups of 5, and that's why you're talking about separate championships and some of those things, different sets of rules and all those things. I think, where is this money coming from? And I think from Texas Tech, I think between the Matador Club and the actual university, not the athletic department, but the actual university, they will be able to, they haven't blinked. And in fact, I think, as we saw, very offended when TCU is acting like, yeah, we're going to fully revenue share, like, we're puffing their chest out. And I think Texas Tech had made this decision back in, March or April or whatever it was. And we're like, yeah, you're not special here. And so I think this will be normal. Where you get into the weeds, though, is like, how does each institution take that piece of pie and divvy it up? Because what you're going to get into is, do you take it and split it in half and half go to men, half go to women? Do you give, like the SEC, that $50 million number, that's kind of a 75% of it? We're just going to give it straight to football, then we'll figure out the rest. Because somebody's going to sue. It's going to end up in court, whether it's football players unionizing or football players basically saying, wait, time out, folks. All of this revenue sharing is because of us. How dare you give this to everybody else because of our sport and our hard work and all those things. Whereas the Title IX folks are going to say, it says it right here, equal opportunity, or it should be fair. And so good question on how that lies, but that's why I think that they're still in the process of figuring it out. But I think 105 on the football team, and kind of you hear people like Joey and others in the space already figuring out like what a cap would look like and all that. You're starting to get some progress made there, but it's just a matter of time before we get like hard line data that tells us this is the way it's going to work. And it doesn't mean you can't pivot or change or adjust if you're start to see, well, the wind's blowing this way, I guess, well, this school did it this way. And it also means that the collectives have a different role at that point. The collective then becomes kind of almost like the Red Raider Club in theory, and you're just giving to the whole pie instead of just for the NIL component. But what you'll hear is that the collectives will now be in business for extra. So once they revenue share, it's a sweetener. It's like, hey, we really want this quarterback. Well, I see what the roster space is that's allocated for me. It's going to take more than that, than the Matador Club or the equivalent of were to, step in and fix it. Because I think like the rumors were Ohio State paying like 13, 14 million for their team this year. I think Georgia, their payroll is like 12 to 13 million. I don't have any idea what Texas Tech is, but and again, no way to prove that. But I think it's pretty fascinating the amounts of dollars. And heck, Calvin, 15 million per year is a bargain compared to what the NFL costs. NFL, they're paying it's 255 million.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I get 15 to put a football team together compared to 255. Hello.
Well, you will have some guys, unlike on an NFL roster, you will have some guys on a college roster that could go on to be like the fourth most popular orthodontist in the Metroplex or something like that in the future. So it's not exactly apples to apples, of course, but yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about. It reminds me of Charles Barkley talking about, if we only had to pay Cam Newton $250,000 for that was a steal. That was a bargain. And those days are going to be long gone as far as what those numbers look like for some premier players or guys that are actually at the top of the sport. And one of the things I'm so anxious to see play out, and, just going a few years back, thought that some student athletes should take a very cautionary tone when discussing, has to do with the collective bargaining aspect of it. Because, at that point, reality really sets in, doesn't it? Where the money and the revenue is actually being generated. And if you have to make hard choices, who you're going to err on the side of. And it's not going to be non-revenue sports, I don't think. And there are far more non-revenue sports than there are revenue sports. There's like 1.5. It's men's basketball, it's college football on most campuses, and college football by a wide margin, even over men's basketball. So I don't really foresee, I don't understand how you could operate in the same sort of category or bubble from sport to sport to sport as you mostly have for a long, long time now. And I'm sure we'll get into on some future episodes some of the rulemaking bodies and governing bodies that are now being proposed to kind of separate at least a college football and a Power Four type of context from some others. There were some comments delivered recently at some of these conference media days, talking about why do we want a Division III, president helping to make rules for the SEC or whatever it might be. And I don't know. I think I'm a fair-minded person. Sometimes I'm probably not. That's probably some natural instinct. But I think that makes sense to me. Yeah, why do we want a Division III guy, throwing around any weight or carrying any influence? Just as an example, whenever it comes to the way that the SEC or the Big Ten or those in that category are going to decide, say, a national champion. There are some unintended consequences I'm sure we're not going to like, but some of that does make sense to me. And I just don't know how at the end of the day you can practically and feasibly keep college football sort of under this umbrella with everyone else when it is such a behemoth unto itself whenever you start talking about the dollars.
And I think at some level, which is the intent here, that this will, it's not correct to say level the playing field, but it does give you parameters to where instead of everybody operating a bit differently and all that, and it's kind of up to you to decide how you want to operate. I just think it's, because there was a time when, back in the 60s and 70s, I'm trying to remember when they instituted the 85-man limit, because there were teams that would, Texas was famous for signing the 5 best quarterbacks in the state of Texas, if only just to play keep away.
Right.
Hey, we want to screw Tech or A&M or whoever, we'll just sign them all. And that way that, that's the truth. And then it's like, okay, let's institute an 85-man limit. And then it kind of fairly, kind of balance things out a bit. But I think that's the intent here is to try to give you some guardrails. Got a dollar figure. You've got you've got a limit, and then kind of up to you to kind of determine what ultimately that looks like. And again, you can go above and beyond, as we've talked about with the sweetener term. Wouldn't we all love some sweetener? Wouldn't you love to be good enough to be on a deal and be like, hey man, this little roster spot, I'm worth more than that. Yeah, we'll make it good. So anyway, but
like a little sweetener, yeah,
that's right. So this is all. Maybe we get news this week, as Pete Thamel indicated, but I think that this is kind of the way the wind's blowing. It all certainly points this way. I don't know what to think about the 34-man limit for baseball, because we've talked about the Title IX issues that the football aspect could create, and I'll be interested to see kind of what that looks like, unless you're just saying we're going to cut. We're going to start cutting the tennis team and I don't know what all that looks like, to try to balance the numbers of scholarships, because these are massive numbers of scholarships. It's not like just 5,
right?
It's significant, like 20 plus 20 plus 20. That's so anyway.
Keep your hands off that meat judging team. Don't you dare look that way. I do. Before we get out of here, and again, I'm a Tech fan, so maybe I'm just telling myself this, hoping against hope. But I am glad, I think, in this situation that you have a guy that is of the generation and what I think is a fairly, progressive mindset as it relates to college sports. You have a guy like Kirby Hocutt leading your athletics department right now. I can imagine some who maybe are a little bit bushier in the years, a little older in the tooth, kind of digging in some heels and thinking, we see it with coaches too. It's not just ADs, but I'm not going to play this game to this extent, or I'm not going to really embrace this new era. I don't get that vibe from Kirby Hocutt at all. And I guess as a Tech fan, I am glad that you've got that type of leadership that maybe does at least give you an advantage to evolve with the sport or with the level of competition as it evolves.
Absolutely have to be, the ability to pivot and change and stay ahead. And Kirby's also, I think Texas Tech fortunate to have him, but then Kirby's also fortunate to have people like, Dusty Womble and Cody Campbell and John Sellers and the variety of folks that have really, allow you to be able to pivot quickly because of the financial resources that you can tap into. I mean, you're this isn't really anything we get into, but I mean, softball, I think potentially is about to make a big splash because of an NIL situation. I think West Kitley just made a big signing, and the track program signed the top sprinter in the portal, and all because of an NIL situation. I mean, when you start beating out Florida State and Florida and LSU for a track kid, but I mean, this is just the game that you're playing right now. So I think, Texas Tech's in a good spot. But again, we want to win more football games, right? And that's ultimately what this is all going to come down to.
The old front door to the university, right? That old line. Just need to win a few football games. National championship in track and field, fantastic. But what about that front door to the university? We got to pick up some slack there, and hopefully going to be doing so very, very soon. All right, some really interesting stuff to discuss, and obviously when it comes to pass, we'll have a little bit more of a defined idea as to how it will impact our beloved Red Raiders, which is what we care about. Forget the rest of you. I don't care how it impacts you. How's it going to impact Texas Tech? So I'm sure we'll have some more conversations on this subject moving forward, but appreciate the insights and perspectives for now. As always, Chris, enjoyed it, man, and we'll see you for the next round tomorrow. Okay, sounds good, man. Looking forward to it. Keep hope alive, everybody. Get subscribed on YouTube as well, or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. Thanks for making us your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On Big 12, also on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. For Chris, I'm Casey. Thanks for being out there, and we hope to see you back for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.